Chapter 8 Mr. Brightman? Yes, I'm Brightman. But I know it is you, Mr. Thorne. I only wished to get your attention. The voice was male, and the accent was Russian. Who are you? Never mind, Mr. Thorne. We've never met, but now I think that we should. I'm not so sure. Perhaps we already have. A pause, then. It is interesting that you say that, Mr. Thorne, but I assure you we've never so much as laid eyes on each other. And I believed him. It wasn't the Russian from Halifax, but he must have been following me, whoever he was. It was the only way he could have known I was here. I looked around. The booth was only 4 feet by 8, but was nonetheless fairly substantial. Baseboard heaters, built-in coat locker, a shelf with a portable television. Monty Hall was dealing away in full color. There were tinted glass windows on all 4 sides, and I knew he had to be close by, but there wasn't much I could see. The booth was on the downslope of a hill, so I could just make out the tops of the cars passing along Jefferson, while the far side of the road was completely hidden from view. Mr. Thorne. Yes, I'm here. I am surprised you are not more interested. I can tell you everything, Mr. Thorne. How it was done, what has happened to Brightman, everything. No, it is better to meet face to face. Russia. Brightman had been there. I had lived there, that man in Halifax, and now, I said, there might be other things besides Brightman to talk about. Oh, yes, many things. Such as, whatever you wish. You're Russian. Maybe we should talk about that. If you like, we can talk about anything. We can talk about the Bliney or the Burgundy or the Black Hundreds, anything. I'm a regular Peter Klikov. Mr. Thorne, just ask me and I'll point you where you want to go. A car, leaving the lot, came up to the window. The kid stuck the ticket into an electric timer, which came down with a clunk, then passed it outside. Mr. Thorne? All right. Good. It is 4 o'clock now. In 1 hour and a half, at 5:30, come to 362 Grayson Street. It is just an old garage, but from there we can go somewhere else. All right, I'll be there. Very good. trench of the Detroit River, with Canada huddling glumly on the opposite bank. In front of me, rising up like some urban mirage, were the towers of the Renaissance Center. I made for them, thinking I could rent a car there, but in the end caught a taxi out front. I was curious. The man on the other end of that phone must have been following me all morning, unless he'd been following May and had picked me up later, and I wondered if he was still on my tail. After 10 minutes, I decided he wasn't, but then we were on Michigan Avenue. The cabbie turned around, headed back downtown, and dropped me at a Hertz office on Washington Boulevard. After the usual routine, they put me into the driver's seat of a Pontiac, and the clerk showed me Grayson Street on a map. Heading north, I nosed up Woodward, resolutely keeping my mind on my driving. It was the easiest way of forgetting how nervous I felt. 5 o'clock. A gloomy dusk hung over the city as the rush-hour crowds fled toward Ann Arbor and Flint, Ypsilanti and Lansing. I joined the escape. Caught up in the edgy panic, I let the traffic suck me up Gratiot, then down the Chrysler Freeway. Like most Detroit expressways, it's built below grade, a canal full of carbon monoxide and noise. Overhead, an electric sign gave the temperature, 49 degrees, and flashed the fact that 5,467 Fords had been built that day, while on WXYZ the disc jockey intoned, "Like Mr. Ford used to say, I don't believe in caging birds or animals or any living thing." I fought clear of all this at the Plymouth plant exit. I was now in Hamtramck and began hunting for Grayson. Trapped between the expressway approaches and an old railway spur, it turned out to be almost impossible to get to, blocked off by high fences or separated from ordinary roads by immense vacant lots. But I made it on my third pass, bumping across an abandoned siding and then turning down a stretch of gravel until the street sign started. It was getting dark now. Only a few kids were out on the sidewalks, and a pair of black men in boots and overalls plodded slowly home. Though not as bad as St. Jean and the area around the auto pound, it was still a melancholy place. The houses were identical cinder-block bungalows. Most were shabby, and the lawns were minuscule, though a few, somehow even more pathetic, boasted a spindly hedge of suburban shrub by the door. I slowed down, trying to spot house numbers, and just then the garage itself loomed up. It appeared abandoned and was built in an old-fashioned style that made me think of gas stations you sometimes find in country towns. The pumps had rounded tops, and the building itself was peeling stucco. Accelerating a little, why give myself away, I continued past it and turned down a side street. I parked and looked at my watch. 10 minutes early. I stared down the street. Lights were on in the houses. A door banged somewhere, and a woman's voice harshly called out a name. About 4 blocks along, the road petered out at a railway embankment protected by a sagging metal fence and lit by a single curved light. I cranked down my window. Behind me, in the side view mirror, the lights of a car drifted down Grayson, and a moment later a black kid on a bicycle came riding up, his shining eyes quietly marking my au fait face. Then he disappeared in the gloom. I lit a cigarette, smoked it slowly. I thought about a time in Moscow when I'd waited like this. I'd been doing an article on the Soviet army and had made contact with a mladshi lieutenant in a guards division. He was only going to tell me about the food, his leave, his pay, the ordinary miseries of day-to-day life in any army, but we both knew that this was technically espionage and that only the most technical definitions would interest a Soviet court. Now, by comparison, but maybe it was a comparison I'd better not make. I flipped my cigarette out the window, got out myself. The street was empty except for the beat-up old heaps drawn up at the curb, one of which was resting right on its wheel rims. I locked the car door and walked back toward the corner, my steps grittily crunching on the cement of the sidewalk. At Grayson, I paused a moment, looking around. To the left, a block away, a few indistinct figures were grouped around a car. Somebody laughed. Then the car door opened, and in the glow of the interior light, I caught the shine of legs and shoes and the flash of a smile. Kids, I thought, horsing around. I looked right toward the garage. I couldn't see it from this angle, but a dark, empty space marked where it was. On the far sidewalk, a single man was walking toward me, hands thrust deeply into the pocket of his windbreaker. On this side, further on, beyond the garage, 2 men were walking away from me. Streetlights spread shadows into the gloom. As the 2 men passed into one of these areas of light, I saw that they had green garbage bags over their shoulders, heading for the coin wash, doing their laundry before the crowds came after supper. I started ahead. Each step made a precise, distinct sound. Behind me, I heard those kids laughing, and then one of them hooted, "Man, whose side you on?" And they all laughed some more. The man in the windbreaker passed by me on the far side of the street. Up ahead, the two men with the laundry bags disappeared in the dark. And then I could see the garage. Quiet, recessive, like some forlorn crossroads gas station on a lonely stretch of road in the bush. There was a sign on the top of it, braced by a wooden scaffold. Commercial lot for sale, Murphy Realty, 543-6454, and beside it was an overgrown yard and a boarded-up house. I slowed my pace, but no one showed himself. Coming even with the station, I angled across the asphalt apron toward the two skinny pumps. I stopped there and looked around. The dark building, the black asphalt, merged with the gloom. The whole street seemed to recede, and still no one appeared. Indeed, the street was now completely deserted, for, looking back, I could see that even the man in the windbreaker had gone on his way. Stepping closer to the pumps, I realized that their hoses were cut, and the glass over their gauges was broken. Inside, you could see the faded seals from the Michigan Department of Commerce. The dial was set at 39.9 cents a gallon, and the last sale had netted $12.94. Dark, cold, and I had that sense of being out in the open. But he had to be able to see me. I began to fidget, tugging my gloves over my fingers, putting my hands in my pocket, taking them out again. Then I lit up a cigarette and let the Bix flame show off my face. Still no one came. I smoked slowly, standing still but looking round in every direction. Shadows. The wind, not too bad, I thought, or it wouldn't be if Grayson Street was a film set. I was Humphrey Bogart, and Lauren Bacall was back home fixing dinner. As it was, a couple of minutes slipped by. I smoked the butt down, then ground it out. Where was he? I walked across to the gas station's office, thinking that he might be inside and still hadn't seen me. I stopped in front of the window. On it, one letter for each pane of glass, the words BARGAINGAS were spelled out in white paint. Close up, you could see the mark of the brush, and when I shaded my eyes and looked through the R, the old dusty glass filled my nose with a dirty, coppery smell. It was dark inside, hard to see, but I could tell no one was there. The place was a shambles. A plywood counter had been turned over, and there was rubbish everywhere. Bottles, flattened cartons, old cans, plastic jugs. No one had been here in weeks. I stepped back, but then I tried the office door, and the knob turned easily. I hesitated, then stepped inside. It was darker, colder. I stood in the doorway, feeling the darkness and emptiness of the street out behind me. I stared ahead. In the corner of the room was an old Coke machine, the kind with the white enamel lettering, and a wire rack for empties beside it. Feeling an urge to call out, I repressed it, then changed my mind. Hello? Hello? Anyone there? Whistling in the dark. Now the silence left me feeling more like a little foolish. There wasn't even an echo, just grit grinding under my heel as I shifted my weight. To the left was the gray patch of the doorway, into the service bays. Now that I'd come this far. There was nowhere else left to go, so I stepped through, but just inside, wanting a clear line of retreat. I waited again. Open space stretched before me. It was very dark, but enough light leaked in from the street to make the darkness swirl and eddy like fog. It is just an old garage, but from there we can go somewhere else. I looked around. I could see two greasy pits where they'd taken out the lifts, a length of rubber hose dangling from a hook on the back wall, and right by my head there was a pasted-up picture of Miss Rheingold, 1955. But nothing more. Slowly I edged into the gloom. The floor was cement, but huge chunks of it had chipped or crumbled away, so that patches of damp earth showed through. Smells, oil that cold concrete gets, the sour smell of wet earth. My toe nudged a can. I flicked it into the darkness, where it rattled away. Pivoting slowly, I looked back toward the street. Most of the panes in the service doors had been broken. On the others, scrawled in the dust, were the usual obscenities, and a tic-tac-toe X had won 3 times out of 5. Deciding that no one was there, I flicked on my lighter and looked at my watch. 5:38. Was I being stood up? Irritation, but I felt myself relax a little as well. I was certain now that no one was about to step out of the darkness, and that made it easier to pretend I was being ever so brave. The trouble was, the obverse of fear isn't courage, but boredom. I stamped my feet, lit a cigarette, began checking my watch every 2 minutes. Maybe he was lost, I thought, though that didn't seem right for a real Peter Kirilov. Peter was a mythical figure from the days of the old believers, holy Russian pilgrims who dreamed of a mythical kingdom of the white waters where righteousness reigned. The road there was hard and long, but in a certain village, if you could only reach it, Peter Kirilov would show you the right way. A car came up Grayson, casting a huge net of shadow around me. Very melodramatic, but then it passed silently by. 5:46. He wouldn't come, I was sure of it. Or perhaps he was being subtle. Perhaps he was already here, watching, waiting for me to leave. Then he'd follow me and present himself when I least expected it. Actually, that was not inconceivable, and it made an excellent excuse for leaving right now. But I told myself to wait. Till 6, give him that long, and then go. 5:49. I began moving around, just to keep warm. My eyes were getting used to the dark. I realized that the place had been abandoned for years. Half the floor had crumbled away. There were a few plastic jugs and quart oil cans littered around a squashed cardboard carton or two. But the interior had been stripped to the bone by a generation of kids. Everything useful was gone. At some point, vagrants had built a fire in the corner. Tossing my cigarette onto a gray pile of ash, I continued along the back wall, and that's when I heard a slight sound. It wasn't much, barely a rustling, though more metallic than that, yet not exactly a scrape. It came again. I stepped further along till I reached another doorway. The door itself was gone, but it was hard to see out because something was blocking the way. I went closer. It was just one of those big metal dumpers for picking up trash. I stepped outside into a dark, cold zone that smelled of wet cinder and ash. I listened again and didn't hear anything. It was probably nothing more than a rat. And then, deciding to walk around to the front of the building, I began to edge sideways between the dumper and the back wall of the garage. Old burdock, gutter, dangling from brackets, an electric meter, all smashed to hell. Finally, I squeezed around the edge of the dumper, and then the sound came again, from inside. A settling sound, a weight shifting. I hesitated, don't much like rats or dark holes, but then I reached up, grabbed the top edge of the dumper, and pulled myself up. I looked in, dropped back. I wasn't sure what I'd seen. I took out my lighter, clumsy with my gloves. I adjusted the flame as high as I could, then hoisted myself back up. The thing was so rusty that the metal felt like sand under my fingers. With a grunt, I stretched forward, leaning my chest across the top rail, and stuck out my right arm. The orange flame of the bick hissed and bent in the darkness. I looked down. The bottom of the dumper had rusted out years ago. Now weeds poked through the filmy metal, and a black puddle glistened in the mud. There wasn't much to see. A pile of old Quaker State oil cans, bits of muffler and pipe, half a door panel, and a painter's plastic drop sheet that was wrapped around something, all twisted and folded. The clear plastic sheet was shot through with wrinkles and fissures, like an ice cube, but the wrinkles were wet and red, and frozen at the center was the body of a fat, hairy man with no head, hands, or feet.